Welcome to Spotlight on the Real Science of Sport podcast with Professor Ross Tucker and Gareth Davies.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Spotlight with Gareth Davies and myself, where we are going to take a spin around the world of sport and discuss what's been happening. Specific focus today on track and field. The Diamond League is now complete and we look forward to the Tokyo World Champs that begin in 2 weeks, give or take a day. And then we talk about the other big sports event going on at the moment, which is the Women's Rugby World Cup. So we'll offer some insights and some sports science perspectives on that. Let's, Gareth, what's, speaking of news, what's the most interesting training news of you in your life this week?
My training or just generally training?
Your training. What's the most interesting thing in your training? Yeah.
My training, I'm just coming to the end of my first 6-week block of proper cycle training, which I've completely made up. So it's just been based on distance because I'm completely ignoring Goodhart's law. So, yeah.
I got a dropper post installed on my mountain bike last week because I realized that if I don't do something, I'm going to kill myself on the mountain. And it does make a difference.
You're mountain biking now, right?
Yeah, grudgingly, because I entered a race in January, so I thought I'd better get the old fat tires out and see how it goes. It's not been going that well. I've fallen a few times. I'm really, really not good on the mountain bike. I don't enjoy it at all, so I don't know what I'm doing here. But thanks to my dropper post, I'm 20% less likely to go over the bars than I was before.
Is it a long one? Or?
It drops and then funny actually, it's you sort of, you know how these things work. You push a paddle and then the seat drops so that you can get your weight down and back when you're going down some technical stuff. And it's 125 millimeter. And the other day I dropped it down, and then when I got back onto the next climb, I put it back up. But unknown to me, it didn't go all the way up. It got stuck like 3 centimeters from the top of its range. So I did the whole climb in like this 3 centimeter lower position. And by the time I got to the top, my legs were absolute toast because you're in that like deep flexed position. And I got to thinking it'd be quite a good training aid actually, because you can get a specific muscle workout from riding with your saddle too low. Wouldn't recommend it though.
See, we've had that insight. I actually meant how long was the race, not how long was your drop.
Right.
We've learned a little bit about your biomechanics.
The race is 129 kilometers. It's called the Atterquas. It's a pretty big race here in South Africa. It was won by Alan Hatherley last year. And the year before, I think a lot of the elite mountain bikers come out because it's part of the build-up to Cape Epic. And so they come out and do it. Not that that's relevant to me, riding in the middle and back of the back, but I would still. It's
You get quite some big bike races in South Africa, don't you? Especially the off-road stuff. Why is that? Is it just suited for the terrain?
Yeah, the weather and the terrain. Like down here in the Western Cape, unbelievable mountain biking. It's it's not for nothing. The Cape Epic is the most prestigious one, the Tour de France of mountain biking, they say. What's really surprising is that we don't produce more world-class cyclists. If you look at Australia compared to us, for instance, why? Why not?
Is it perhaps a structure thing?
Yeah,
is it just,
exactly.
There isn't the club scene. Is there not such a big club scene over there, perhaps? Anyway.
It's funny, when I was still with that Stellenbosch Academy, it's bigger than I'd realized, but it's not well known. And then the translation of a 19, 20-year-old into a 22, 23-year-old. Maybe the transition into Europe is too difficult for us. Currency, I don't know. It hasn't been a challenge. Well, it's a challenge, but it hasn't been a barrier to Australia. But yeah, it's just another example of South African sport not maybe realizing its full potential because of systems. Anyway, that's not...
I bet Gerald knows. Anyway, yeah, we have
I'm sure he'll have views on it. And speaking of, thanks for bringing me back. Speaking of, if you want to hear views of other listeners, Discourse is the place to do it. You sign up by clicking the link in the show notes or just visit Patreon. I had that for about a few weeks streak and I keep getting it wrong again. Patreon.com, you look for The Real Science of Sport, you make a monthly pledge and that gets you access to Discourse, which was described this week by someone who discovered it new as one of the best sources of knowledge on the internet. So there's that. And you can be a member of that community and talk about everything we're about to talk about today and more. And the Tokyo World Champs that we're going to focus on. And perhaps we start there with our Discourse Digest.
Yeah, we'll start actually with the athletics, as we were saying, and because the Zurich was hosting the finals of the Diamond League this week. And it was split over 2 nights. And we'll start with the opening night on Wednesday because the pole vault, high jump, and the shot put were held in the city centre. And I'm not wrong in saying that you're a fan of this format, right?
Yeah, I think it's cool. Imagine as a spectator to be able to go and watch a shot put or a pole vaulter from 5 meters away instead of 50.
That immediacy is good.
Yeah.
It really does. The crowd really do start to get involved. And I think the athletes really enjoy it as well. They enjoy something different.
Have you seen quotes from athletes afterwards saying either this is great, I wish every Diamond League race did this, or meet, as opposed to I'd much rather be in the stadium tomorrow night?
Are they completely polarized to this?
I'm asking. I don't know.
Right,
I haven't seen them.
To be honest with you, I haven't seen. I'll go and have a look for those.
I did
But
see.
my only thought was
Sorry,
that in some ways that the events might be compromised by the setup, the high jump setup and the long jump especially. That the runway didn't seem long enough in some ways. If all the athletes are starting from a crammed position right at the very end of it, you think perhaps they need a few more meters on it. And I'm wondering if that sort of compromises the integrity of the sport at all. And does that matter if they've all got the same equipment?
I'm sure it would. I mean, I'm going to watch now specifically in Tokyo to watch the long jump and say, what's the distance between the person with the longest run up and the shortest? Because they don't guess at the length of the run up. They've worked out that that's what they need to get to maintain and hit the board at the optimal speed. So if someone needs 4 meters longer than someone else, and then you constrain them by 4 meters, then one person's disadvantaged relative to another. So it must affect it in some way.
But I thought about it because I was watching the Greek long jumper whose name escapes me, Tentaglu.
Tentaglu, yeah.
He failed a number of jumps. He just basically ran straight through the pit, and I was thinking, something must be up with his run up, and I wondered if it was that he didn't have the length available on the runway. But overall, I think it's a good chance to promote these field disciplines because we know that track and field struggles as a whole, and especially the field disciplines. I mean, that's why Michael Johnson thought he could get rid of them totally in Grand Slam track. So promoting them this way to their own night, I think really does work.
Yeah, like in Zurich has been doing this for a long time. They're actually leaders, but not for all of them like this. They had a pole vault. I'd be lying if I said when I knew the first one was, but I know there was one in 2021 where they did pole vault in the train station. If you've ever been to Zurich's train station, it's like most European train stations, this grand building with a really high roof and a lot of space in the sort of concourse. And they set that up. It must have been hella disruptive to the travelers, but it was cool. And I saw quotes actually then, that's what I was going to say earlier, from jumpers. Nina Kennedy was one of them saying how much they enjoyed it. So I think it is popular with athletes. I'd like to think if I was an elite field athlete, it would be preferable to me because I'm surrounded. It's always been strange to me to watch a long jumper who really is performing to only 1/4 of a stadium. No, 1/8, because it's only half the length of 1/4 of the stadium. And now you can be surrounded. You can have people in front, behind, either side of you. I think the intimacy is way better. And also you're no longer the insert while there's nothing on the track program. You're the focal point. That's got to be valuable. So what I think they should do...
You mentioned yesterday, actually.
...is they should have a really informed technical analyst on the side next to the pit, and the athletes need to agree that they're going to talk to him between jumps. I know that some of them won't want to do that, and if they don't, that's fine. They'll lose out because they will no longer be as sought after and as media friendly. But imagine getting insights from Mondo Duplantis or Mahuchik or Ole Slagers about why they failed a jump. I think it'd be fantastic viewing. I'd watch field events much more if I had that knowledge coming my way.
I think that's kind of key, really, to getting sports like this over to the public, is just understanding. Because I asked a simple question on Discourse. I have no idea how the high jumpers mark up their run-ups, but it's a fascinating topic because if you looked at the run-up area in Zurich, it was split from left and right hand jumpers, which you never really think about on TV because you don't get that sort of perspective. And of course, without something in the middle, how do they even mark out And of course, somebody said, well, they do a lot of practice jumps beforehand, but we never see this sort of thing. So yeah, there's lots of little nuances. I'd love to know about how the power and the speed affect the takeoff in the long jump or the pole vault. And so those little nuance things, yeah, we just tend to watch it and just go blank, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. Imagine
So,
you could put a drone 10 meters above the high jump mat and takeoff point, and you could then superimpose the top three athletes' run ups, and you can show the different curves and so on. And then if you had a good commentator, they could offer you insights as to why someone's approach is more direct, whereas someone else might approach from a more acute angle and that sort of thing. It would be like it would be what you see golf and cricket doing, for instance, when they analyze bowlers or swings. Look at the flex in Rory McIlroy's right knee at the moment of impact with the driver, that sort of thing. People like that, and athletics misses it.
entirely. Um, so we'll move on to the second night, which was last night, onto the track. And there were some interesting races, I'll put it that way. We'll start off, actually, I'm going to say, I don't like to always be critical, but it felt a little bit flat to me, Zurich, the track side of it, because with the stars weren't really there, which really surprised me, is the finals. And the reason we're recording this on the Friday instead of our usual slot on the Thursday is I said to you, look, let's wait for the Diamond League finals and then we can report back on everything that happened. And then nothing really happened. So I felt a little bit foolish when I saw the lineups, to be honest. So that was a bit of a shame, really, for the finals night.
Yeah, and we've mentioned it once or twice, the placement of the Tokyo World Champs this year being so late. I didn't realize until Sean Engel told me that that's now going to be the way forward in future. Did you know that? I thought it was something to do with the weather.
But I didn't know. I didn't realize that at all. I thought
So
it was just like one of those, that's the way the cycle works. But
no, so it's part of
where
Co's
it's
vision
hosted.
for the sport is that the World Championships must end the season.
Okay.
So this is going to
That's
be now the new
a little
norm.
bit a little bit odd because athletes peak.
Yeah,
And
and so it's got some pretty wide-reaching implications. So, and you can understand Co wants the world champs to be the pinnacle of the year and the final endpoint, and that does in some ways help the narrative. And we've got a podcast coming up with our next guest in which he talks about the narrative and building that, and it should build to a crescendo. So that there is logic in doing that. But it does a few things. One is it makes the season incredibly long. And the other thing it does is it de-emphasizes the competitions that are closer to it. Because Zurich always used to be the world champs in one night. They might have even branded themselves that, but that's definitely how people thought of it. So let's go to Zurich and let's watch if 80% of the world champs who'd been crowned a week or two before coming in competing on one fantastic night. Because the world champs legit is still to come, so many of those aspirant world champions have chosen to train, not race. And so Zurich did feel, to me, diminished last night compared to how it normally is.
yeah, with all respect to the athletes who were there, it did feel a little bit like a second division meet.
Yeah.
We didn't have Kippigon, we didn't have Chabet. We had Lyles, at least he turned up. But the rest of it did feel a little bit like it was a second-rate event in the end. And we saw that in some of the races. You said to me, you got the impression that a lot of people are just hanging on to their form. They're not peaking now. They just, and is it for athletes? You might know this. How long can they hold on to form? Like real peak form? Is it a matter? Would they train again now between here and the championships? Do they taper like us amateur athletes do for events?
Yeah, they will. So if you've chosen not to race Zurich, like Hiltz, Chebet, Kipyegon, Keishan Thompson, Oblique Seville, the list is long. It's longer than the ones who were there. Your current approach is you're in a training camp somewhere, distance runners maybe at altitude, not the sprinters, and you've got basically 12, 13 days left to finish off preparations that are in their final phases. You probably raced 2-3 weeks ago, and that was the last sort of check on where you were, and now you've made the training adjustments. If you did race in Zurich, you hopefully have taken some things out of that race, and now you just want to try and finish off and sharpen. The point I was trying to get at is like staying on their form is one of those implications of putting world champs right at the end, is that athletes have got certain things they can't avoid in a season. They have to qualify at their national championships for many of the teams, and it's obligatory that they must compete there. Some countries have different methods and approaches to selecting teams, others don't. But in many instances, the Diamond League starts in May. So you've got to go May, June, July. At some points, national champs. Then you've got to get through August. Then you've got to go to mid-September. So if you're racing the Diamond League season from start to finish, you're trying to be in race shape for 5 months. We're going to that May, June, July, August, September. That's a really tough ask. And I think the athletes who are going to be successful in Tokyo are the ones who delay the start. So then what that means is now the start of the Diamond League is going to be compromised a little bit. The first few meetings, or the end is the Zurich meetings, because it just stretches the season a little bit too long. It's not compact.
So the
enough.
likely winners are likely to be the ones that missed out yesterday, who took it easy.
Possibly. Lyles is on a different trajectory because he only came into the season late. He didn't race both events at the US Champs because he had the wild card. So I think he's got it under control. Other athletes just have raced much less. Rai Benjamin, for instance, Carsten Warholm. So I don't know. It's not a massive change in the calendar, but the 2 or 3 weeks that you got to extend it. Because to your point, I don't know if you want to be at the very, very peak for more than 3 to 4 weeks. You can be close to your best race shape for much longer. If you look at Chebet, who she didn't almost, but she was in close to world record shape in May. She went away to train. She broke a world record in July. She's gone away to train. So I think you can manage it like that. But if you're trying to race regularly and train and extend for 5 months, I think you're inviting problems for yourself at some point.
Well, actually, we saw a good example of it in the 1500 last night for the women, because Jess Hull was leading by, not quite a country mile, but she had a good lead, and then completely tied up in that last 100 meters or so to be overtaken by Nelly Chepchivir. And I saw a quote from Hull this morning, and she said, I saw Nelly coming closer, it's okay. With the last 100 meters to go, I was tired. My legs were very tired. Because I had very hard training blocks. We are still 2 weeks ahead of World Championships. I learned today my body is fit, but I need to keep energy for the last 100 meters. So the solution is to take a bit out of training. I do not think that today I lost a lot of money. So she's saying that what cost her was the timing of the event, in effect. And now she's going to have to back off a little before the World Champs.
Yeah, and I mean, look, you'd always manage your training volumes leading into the World Champs so that you're as fresh as possible at that point. So maybe they thought they were going to do that anyway, but I think she'd have realized today that she's probably close to the ceiling. That was a really interesting race because she must have gone to the bell in, 250-ish. No, faster, 248-ish. And I reckon she looked like she was going to run 353, 354. And the extent to which she tied up was quite amazing, actually. It was a good illustration for listeners who've heard us natter on about pacing, about how if you take 1 second a lap too fast in the first part, you lose 2 seconds, 3 seconds a lap at the end.
And this, of course, is a race where we've got people like Kipio coming back into it. So it's not looking great for Jess Hull for the World Championships, I would say, right now.
Yeah, she'll have to. I mean, she probably still believes she can run 352, 353. And if Kipyegon does what you expect her to do in Tokyo, then she'll have a pace setter to run it.
The men's 1500 is also interesting because there appears to be a new favourite on the blocks, or at least he's a new favourite with you, right?
Yeah, and for full disclosure, we recorded a podcast on Wednesday that'll come out next week. So before last night's meeting, I was asked by a podcast guest to pick who was going to win the 1500, and this is the guy. If I was every other 1500 meter runner right now, I'd be very worried about how you beat him.
We're talking about Niels Laros from the Netherlands, who actually ran a national record in 3:29.2 last night.
Yeah.
What is it about him that you think gives him that extra edge?
Well, he's a young guy, so I wouldn't say he's new, but his emergence to the top tier of 4 or 5 guys in this event is new. But he was picked out a couple of years ago as this is a guy to watch. He was one of the up and coming guys. But he won the race in Brussels with a finishing kick. He ran 12.5 for the last 100 and 25.6 for the last 200. which is remarkable. But it wasn't off a super fast pace. It was a low 3:30, I think 3:33, 3:34. I think he did more or less the same last night and ran 3:29. He won. He's in the European Champs earlier this year, and I think it was the under 23s, admittedly, so not the same standard of field. He won the 800 and the 5,000. So generally, when you see a guy who can run a good 800 and he's a good 5,000 meter runner, and then you see at 1,500 the ability he's got to kick off what we discovered last night can be quite a fast pace. The dilemma for every athlete now is, well, what do we do? If it's slow, he's got finishing speed that I think is better than anyone in the world at the moment. And he can also run an under 3:30 with not dissimilar finishing speed. So there's a real dilemma now for them, because the guys like Kerr and Hocker, they don't want to take it out at 3:27 pace. Ingebrigtsen might, but no one knows whether he'll be able to do that for 3 3/4 laps and still hold the field off. So Lara seems to me to have all the right things in the right proportions to be, I'm not going to say unbeatable, because of course he's not unbeatable, but to be, I think, the strong favourite. I don't think he's just a favourite. I think he's the strong one now.
Really? That surprises me, because it almost feels like the old guard is churning over quicker and quicker these days. Because you've got, say, Ingebrigtsen and Kerr, who were the hot favourites, weren't they, in the Olympics just last year, and were beaten by Hocker, who was like the new guy on the block. And now they're almost like, it feels like they're the old guard already,
Yeah.
being overtaken by these youngsters.
And even more, like Kerr was the new guy when he dethroned Whiteman, who'd been the new guy to beat Ingebrigtsen, who was the new guy who beat Kiprop. So it does. I think you're right. Like, it feels like in this event, the generation runs over a 2-year cycle.
Which is fascinating in itself, because if you look at it in the context that we always talk about this, the youth coming through, it seems that they're coming through faster.
Yeah, and plus we've got
not just faster on the track.
Yeah, and remember, there's a teenage Kenyan in the mix among those top 5 or 6. He was he third last night? I think 2 Kenyans were second and third, and Koech, who was the 18-year-old, was third. I forget who came second. But yeah, the 1,500 I think is on the men's side is going to be the best race in Tokyo. I just if it's really, really fascinating to think, like, what are the Americans and Hocker make of and Kerr rather make of Laros? How do you beat that? Because I wouldn't want to take my chances in a 3:33 race and try and outsprint him, because he looked so comfortable at doing it as well. It didn't seem like he's at the limit of his abilities.
Koech is the Kenyan who's 19 years old. He ran a 3:30 last night, who came third.
Yes,
and
but
Reynolds,
second was another Kenyan.
Cheriot.
Yes.
He's 21. So
yeah, and then there's another Kenyan who's like 7 generations ago Kenyan, Timothy Cheriot. He's the one who runs with that sort of forward-leaning style, like he's sitting backwards and leaning forwards.
Oh yeah, he's 10 years older than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
because you're old these days. If you hit your 30s, you've had it, Ross.
Yeah, for sure. Should they have, did you see the controversy with Ingebrigtsen not being allowed to run? Should they have let him in?
I didn't see that.
He wanted to run.
He was still recovering from injury.
No, but he said he was ready, and he wanted to race once before Tokyo, and he wanted it to be Zurich, and they said you can't, because the Diamond League rules say that unless you've raced one Diamond League, you can't qualify even on a wild card. So they declined his his application.
That's absolutely fine by me. That's why it's the finals.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, I get that. I just think it's a shame for a sport that really wants and needs matchups, that when it's got one on the deck and you can't make it happen. But I understand that you can't bend the rules just because a big name comes knocking. Then where do you stop?
Exactly. So I've got no sympathy for him there. Any other notables? I think the women's 800 was quite interesting.
Yeah, I think the rest of the night.
Georgia and Tabell. She's focusing on the 800 now. She said it.
Yes, I saw an interview that popped up on social. She said if the order had been the other way around, she'd have done both. But I think she clearly believes that a medal in the 8 is easier than a medal in the 15, which I don't think is wrong. I think it's clear.
Again, well, Keely Hodgkinson is obviously the clear favourite in the World Championships for that, but it might be a British one too. You never know in the 800.
Yeah, the Swiss
And then we
Warrow.
had
What was her name? The Swiss woman who won last night, Nicole Warrow. She was that. Did I get that right? She's
yeah, I
really
think so.
impressive. So I thought she was probably the favorite for the silver at the moment. But that's an interesting one as well because no one knows how Hodgkinson will run it without a pacemaker, and so normally you wouldn't say plan your race around someone else, but I think Hodgkinson is so much better than everyone else that it's kind of necessary in this instance that they do it. So that'll be an interesting one, but I don't think a competitive one. The men's 800, on the other hand, is crazy.
I it just seems to be in such a state of flux. I don't know whether I'm coming and going, and who's in form, who's not. So, the, who are you picking for that one?
Well, Wanyonyi hardly ever loses, it feels like. He's the Olympic champ, and he won last night. Okay, didn't win the other night, so I've just found 1 in 3. But he seemed, I think he's the favorite, but like as much as you can be a favorite in an event like the 8, because it is wildly unpredictable. I think it's been, for a long time, the most unpredictable event in track and field. Partly because it's the distance sprint, if that concept makes sense. And a tactical mistake costs you so much because you are so far into physiological death zone territory that if you waste energy with 300 to go, the cost that you pay at the 100 at 50 to go is enormous. So it's interesting because when Yanni, the way he races, like coaches used to say always, you've got one move in the 800, don't waste it. When Yanni seems to make a big move with 300 to go, and then it always looks like they're coming in behind him and they're queuing up to beat him in the last 50 meters, and he never seems to concede the lead. It's really interesting because you wouldn't say watching him that that's the most effective way to race, but it works. It is.
Well, I thought exactly the same because I thought he was going to do a Jess Hull from a couple of
Yes.
minutes before. Because I thought he's going to tie up here, and the British runner Virgin was going to easily go past him, and probably Marco Rupp as well from Canada. But it didn't. He just held on and held on and held on. But as you say, it's a very dangerous way to race.
Yeah, I think so. And if you push it that hard with 300 to go, because you can see he opens a lead at the down the back straight, and then he sort of concedes that lead, and then he just and that's not the first time. You go back and watch every Diamond League that he's won this year. The pattern is similar. Also in that race, Arab seems to me to be one of the guys hanging on to form. I don't know what the training's like. Maybe like Hull, he can go away over 10 days and sharpen up. And then also in that race, Josh Hoey from the US needed to win it to make the world champs, and I think he was 8th, like right at the back. He was the only guy not to break 144, so the race was high in quality. But I think he's an example, actually, of someone the season was just 1 week too long for him.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember we were talking about bicarb? I'm going off on a complete tangent here. I apologize. But remember we were talking about bicarb. Does that have an effect in the 800?
Yeah, I
Do you
think it's
think?
probably like in the sweet
That's.
spot of where bicarb would be effective.
I thought it was slightly longer. I thought perhaps a 15, 5, and 10.
Well,
But
it
if
always,
you think that the 800 would.
yeah, because back in the 80s, 90s, bicarb was a sprint performance enhancer. So, like, it was used by 200-meter athletes, kayakers who were doing efforts lasting less than a minute. So, I would have thought that the 800 is probably right in its optimal distance duration range to enhance performance because look, remember what bicarb's doing is buffering. So actually, there's less physiological basis to think that it would work effectively over longer distances, but it seems like it does. But over the short distances where you need buffering, and if the 800 is a fatigue tolerance test, basically, other longer events, it's fatigue avoidance, fatigue management. In the 800, I think, and for hurdles, you're just accepting fatigue, and the extent to which you can tolerate it determines how much you slow down in the last 150 meters. So I would have thought that bicarb's making a pretty significant impact on the 800 meter performances.
Yeah, the reason I brought it up was for that reason, because I've been looking at some of the results over time, and there seems to be a lot of sort of chatter in the data of the times. And I'm wondering if you get sort of responders to bicarb or people who can't even tolerate it at all. And that's causing this issue. Not just the shoes these days, because everybody's got the shoes, but bicarb is one of the. Oh, well, you've said that shoes have got responders and non-responders. I just wonder if bicarb's having that much of an impact.
I
Who
th-
knows?
I think probably yes, but I would be guessing if it said how much. Is it 1%? Is it 0.1? Is it 2% for some people? It would be unusual,
Hmm.
almost unique, if it didn't have responders and non-responders.
Which in an event, this is what I was thinking, an event as short
Yes.
relatively as the 800 meters, where it's won by such tiny fractions, is that the difference?
Yeah, it could well be. Could well be. And I wonder whether, I
There
mean,
we
it's
go.
not harmful to health, although certainly overdosing would be. But at what point does it start
Well,
to tick off boxes like other banned substances are? I've seen people saying, will they ban bicarb? I don't think at this point it's close, but philosophically it's an interesting one to wonder about.
what's the effect of overdosing on bicarb? Isn't it just embarrassment on the track rather than anything dangerous?
Yeah, it's a sort of self-regulating system. Because how much can you pay for that overdose? There's only a limited amount of cost there.
Indeed. Right, we'll just look at one more race quickly, because the 200 meters for men, as we said earlier, had Noah Lyles and Tobago in it. And Lyles came out the victor, but again, he started really, really slowly compared to the others. He was a tenth of a second behind nearly after the first 10 meters on Tobago. And I had a look at this. He didn't catch up, or start catching up rather, until 160 meters into the race, and then he was just kept closing the gap by like hundredth of a second a time, until he beat him just by a couple of hundred seconds. So again, we talked last week, I think, about Noah Lyles' start, and I should have probably got into a little bit more at the time. If he did manage to improve, because his reaction time's slow as well, but if he did manage to improve his start, does that take away as a sprinter from the rest of his repertoire?
It might. Remember, we asked Stuart McMillan way back now. I think the first time we ever spoke to him, he says, I said to him, if you're coaching a sprinter and you know they've got this weak start, like, do you focus on that? And he said, you've got to be real careful because where you focus means you can't focus elsewhere. And so I don't know that it necessarily means that if he improves his start, he'll get worse in other areas, but it depends on the process that he takes to get to that point. If his training has to change enough to improve the start that he compromises his, what McMillan would call his gift, then there's a risk that he does, yes.
Because it seems to be again a little bit like the other runner that it's a fine line. You're running a risk every time if you're playing catch up.
Yeah, and I mean, in the 100 meter against Seville, I think we spoke about it on last week's show, including with some of the stats. He didn't actually make up any ground on him either. So we said then that I think there's two reasons for him to be a little bit concerned. And based on what you've just said about last night, and visually you could see it, he concedes, 2 meters in the first 50. And then, yes, he was good enough last night to come back, but maybe not as much as he would have thought he would have come back on the guy. So I don't know. I think, and he'll say he's 12 days away and things are good. He's rounding into form, but I don't think it's the same Lyles we saw 2 years ago yet.
Hmm. Do you know what really surprised me? I read this morning. This makes him the first ever track athlete to claim 6 Diamond League titles, which include 5 victories in the 200 meters. Can you guess which year his first 200-meter victory was in the Diamond League?
Well, if it must have been before COVID.
Yeah, 2017.
No way. That's how old was he
that's
then?
crazy. I can't believe he's been around that long.
How old is he?
Lyles?
Yeah. I've always thought of
him.
him as 24, 25, but he can't be if he was winning. He must have won Diamond League 200s then in his teens.
Born in 1997.
So 28.
He's been around longer than I thought.
Yeah.
There wasn't as much of a gap between Bolt and him as I actually thought. So yeah, a little stat for you.
Funny how memory gets.
Any other
warped
observations?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously Tokyo looks like it's going to be a really, really good World Champs. I hope that it is. But there are at least half a dozen events that I can't wait to see the matchups. Benjamin. Warholm's looked really good. He's run 2 really fast times in a row, a world lead, and then last night was good. Benjamin won US trials, and then, as is often the case, they don't compete much in Europe. But that's going to be fantastic. Looking forward to that. There's I think it's going to be a cool World Champs, and we've actually got a bit planned on that. We're going to do, as well as possible, we're going to do everyday coverage for you. One of the upsides of it being in Tokyo is time zones allow us to watch it middle of the day and then record something same day. So the plan, at least for now, is to do every evening a wrap up of the night of the day before, and then a look ahead to the very next day. So that'll be cool. I'm looking forward to that.
We'll give it a go. One thing I forgot to mention, and it's remembered in my notes, was Femke Bol. Have you ever seen an athlete just look so easy and comfortable when they run? It's just shockingly easy for her. Beautiful to watch.
Yeah, she really is, and be interesting to have a side by side of her now and compare it to Paris last year when she kind of looked easy because she had such a bad race there under the pressure that McLaughlin put her under. But she's a really interesting example of how like relaxation equals speed, and if you try harder, you get slower.
Because I was noticed as well at the start of the race, he's talking about relaxation. She has a sort of warm-up method of getting herself going by slapping herself in the face a lot. You notice that?
I feel
and I thought this is a little bit like the
a little bit like
it's like smelling salts.
Yeah, little adrenaline spike. Warholm does the same thing. So.
It just basically fires up the adrenaline, I guess. Okay. We'll move on to the next Discourse Digest topic, which is South African rugby, and in this case, in terms of doping, because the promising South African rugby forward. Have you got any idea how to pronounce this one?
Yeah, we're throwing some names at you last week. Last week, you also got a South African name that you had to bend your tongue around. Asenathi Ntlabakanye.
Why are South African names? Say that again.
Asenathi Ntlabakanye.
Yeah, I'll leave that one to you. That's not even how that's not how it's written. There we go.
That's exactly how it's written. Ntlab Ntlabakanye. Easy.
Easy. I'm going to start giving you Welsh place names now.
Yeah, but that's fine. As long as they're South African names, I'm familiar. If you give me those Eastern European names and some of the Welsh names, no chance.
Yeah, I will be from now on. Laughing at me. Anyway, the South African prop has been provisionally suspended following adverse analytical finding in a doping test. It caught the eye because of a few twists in the plot, because the unnamed substance has been labelled as non-performance enhancing, and the Springboks media claim it was taken under medical supervision. So somewhere along the line has made a mistake, either the player himself or the medical staff. So let's kick off, though, with what do they mean by non-performance enhancing substance?
Yeah, so...
And why is he banned for that?
Well, yeah, so it's not banned yet. The way this happened here in South Africa, you can imagine now it's a Springbok rugby player in South Africa, so it's a story. They announced their squad to go to New Zealand and he wasn't picked, and then it was released that he'd been provisionally suspended. I've subsequently seen that the South African Institute for Drug-Free Sport, which is our USADA, WADA equivalent, has said that they're hopeful that there'll be a hearing within the next 3 weeks. So we'll probably have a conversation then, because we'll have more specifics, because right now we don't know what the substance was, don't even really know the dates and the circumstances around it or what his specific defense is. So we're reading between the lines here to make a couple of observations and hypotheses. When I first saw them saying, and this was a release that the South African Rugby Union put out, saying that it wasn't a performance-enhancing substance, the first thing goes through your head is, well, if it's not performance-enhancing, it wouldn't be on the list, so what's the big deal? But actually, step back, the banned substance list, so WADA's list of substances that are prohibited, are not all necessarily directly performance enhancing. So for example, the likeliest category that this might fall into is a class of drugs that are called diuretics. You'll know those. They are in effect used in doping landscapes and worlds to try and mask the presence of drugs because they help dilute the urine by telling the body make more. In other words, they increase urine output. That's the same class of substance, incidentally, that Ruth, Chep, and Getich failed a test for, and we did an emergency podcast on it. That was a diuretic. So those substances are banned not because they are immediately, directly performance-enhancing, but because they might hide the presence of other performance-enhancing drugs. So that's That's one possibility here. That he's been, because the other part of their media release was that he had been prescribed it by a specialist, and it had subsequently been confirmed and approved by the doctor who works with the rugby players. So 2 doctors. So that, again, diuretics is a prescription drug, so it kind of fits. So at this point, it seems one of the more plausible possibilities.
But it seems very much with the number of doctors involved that this is just a case of paperwork gone wrong, surely.
Yeah, because that's the other thing, and that's the key point, is it was a specialist prescribed it. Now, you know who you're prescribing it to. You've got to know that this guy is a Springbok rugby player or an aspirant rugby player, professional. And then it is subsequently approved by another one. Now, so then you say, okay, if it is a banned substance on the list and it's being prescribed for medical reasons, athletes can still use those provided they get therapeutic use exemption. So the question then will be was the therapeutic use exemption process followed? Did something go wrong with it? Was there an administrative or paperwork error that caused it not to be filed, or was it never followed in the first instance? That I find very difficult to believe. No doctor gives a drug to an athlete and doesn't think about that possibility when they're in the world of sport or specialists. That would be a really bad error to make.
Can't you just go back and get one retrospectively? That's been done before.
Yeah, it has been, and it's possible. I've seen it happen. I mean, sometimes notoriously Armstrong, for instance, because it was a fake one. But if you can legitimately show that, then you can, yes. So there would be a medical paper trail that would potentially legitimize a retrospective TUE. And it's quite possible that that's where this ends. I'm not sure. Again, it's going to depend on the substance. It could be something other than the diuretic. Maybe the nuance in what's being communicated is that he was prescribed something for another medical condition that is performance enhancing, but the purpose of it was not performance enhancement. Then you're in a gray area, because let's say you get stung by bees and you need cortisone, so you take it, or you've got a skin infection, you take cortisone. It's performance enhancing, but in that moment, that's not what your intention was. Is that what they meant? I don't know.
It's difficult with injuries, because we had a conversation earlier this week, didn't we, about injuries and doping, and whether it was fair for players who could come back from injury perhaps sooner if they were allowed to use certain medicines. But of course, if these medicines are on the list, they can't, because you can't just get a TUE just for an injury or something like that. And it brought up actually, and then I brought up the case of Tommy John surgery, didn't I? I know I'm going off on a tangent here, in Major League Baseball, and whether or not that's sort of, you can see some players thinking, well, hang on a minute, how are these players allowed to have like surgery which can actually improve their game in some cases? Tommy John surgery is the replacement of, I think, of a tendon in the elbow for pitchers. Well, I can't even take painkillers for an infection I've got. It just seems that the doping world is a little bit sort of upside down sometimes.
Yeah, and it's a dilemma that I know that people in anti-doping do grapple with. We talk about cortisone again. We just mentioned it before. One of the problems is, just because you're an athlete, you shouldn't be denied access to medicines that a non-athlete would use for a medical condition. And the reason cortisone isn't banned at all times, and this is the point I wanted to make, so let me try and make this a bit better, is cortisone is not banned all the time. It's only banned in competition. And the reason it's only banned in competition is specifically so that athletes can use it for medical need when they're not competing. That's the sort of step that anti-doping has taken to address exactly the problem that you've just raised, because now you get an athlete with an infection, some sort of chest problem, bronchitis, even allergies that can trigger that at certain times of the year, and you're saying, hey, just because you're an athlete, you are not able to use the medicines that all other athletes. That's not right. So they say you can use the cortisone, but just don't compete on it. And so they define windows in which you can be classified as in competition versus out of competition, and then you can use it with a TUE potentially, but out of competition, or sometimes even without a TUE. Now, one of the then pitfalls that invites is that if you get the timing wrong, and you use it too close to competition to the extent that it's still in your system when you get tested, then you look like you've been doping when actually you've just been treating a medical condition. And that's a possibility in Ntlabakanye's case, incidentally. Like it could be a timing issue that they just overlapped the period in which he tested and the period in which he had a TUE for, or used a substance that he didn't need a TUE for but out of competition, and it sort of spilled into the in-competition period. So we'll have to wait to see these details. But as a concept, you are right, and it's one of the areas where anti-doping sometimes maybe overreaches.
But wait, doesn't that introduce a loophole? So I'm not sure if cortisone is performance enhancing, but couldn't that just mean that you, even without a TUE, you could just dope in a window?
Yeah, big time. And that's why.
But isn't that what everybody therefore does?
What's the name? Jeepers, I'm so bad with names. There's an organization that's trying to get cycling teams to sign up to it, and they say that they've got a more stringent anti-doping code than WADA does. It's not Clean Sport Collective. That was Karagach's organization. What was the name? Anyway, there were a bunch of teams that signed up to a code that said for them cortisone is banned at all times. Now,
okay,
they weren't testing it themselves. It was kind of a declaration of intent to have a higher bar than what WADA was imposing. But you're absolutely right, and it's a big concern is that you can go away to training camps and you can use drugs because even if you're tested, you're not in competition, so they wouldn't look for it.
Interesting, because it's not like, well, why are they taking it on themselves? It's just out of interest, those cycling teams, to do this.
I think because they wanted to project to the world that cycling was changing. That cycling was changing.
That's a perception thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it was some people say talk is cheap, but I think that they wanted to put it out there to say that actually the days of Armstrong and co are gone. I'm not sure that it's worked, but I'm trying to look it up here now. So if you hear tapping away on the background, I apologize, but I'm trying to see whether I can find this organization because it's going to annoy me. Anyways.
Well, yeah, because one of the things that Springbok prop, whose name I can't say, one of the things he hasn't been taken and been done for is caffeine. But however, if you're in the NCAA in America, then caffeine is still a banned substance. And I wasn't aware of this. And the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and USADA, the US Anti-Doping Agency, they don't seem to align actually in their anti-doping policies, or at least their methods differ and data doesn't seem to be shared between the two. This came up, Steve brought it up on Discourse. In fact, they seem to work off different lists of prohibited substances, as I just said, because caffeine is on the one list and not on the other. And caffeine, bizarrely to me, remains banned by the NCAA because it's no longer on the list with WADA. And in fact, a single positive test for caffeine cost Drury University its Division 2 swimming title with an unnamed swimmer. He's about to serve a year's suspension just for too much caffeine, which seems crazy to me. Why do we see such discrepancies in something like caffeine? And does it really matter, caffeine?
So to answer the last part first, the NCAA has decided that they're going to have a harder line on stimulants than WADA does, because there's a perception that they're dealing with younger athletes, student athletes, who are more vulnerable potentially to stimulant use and abuse. So caffeine is in the category. Amphetamines is the sort of peak of the stimulant category, clearly banned, I think, by everyone. But then there's a whole range of them. Many of them are found in herbal weight loss supplements, for instance. Caffeine is the one that is, I think, more consumed than any other supplement or drug in the world, actually. But they've decided that they're going to keep it on the banned list because they believe that they're dealing with a more vulnerable population. The reason they can do that in the first place is because the NCAA is a completely private organization and has no obligation to follow either US anti-doping or world anti-doping, which has long been a point of contention, because in most sports, and we've been talking about track and field, but in all others, the NCAA is such a rich pipeline for the US's elite adult athletes, who then are under USADA and WADA. But there's a period during which those athletes are only competing in college sports, that they are not under world anti-doping or USADA regulation, but NCAA. Now, the NCAA will say, we test. But the NCAA system is so vast. Think about how many sports, universities, athletes, and you've got one organization across all of those. So the the depth and the extent of testing in the NCAA is borderline trivial, and even the sanctions for a positive test are different. So for in the NCAA system, you get typically a 1-year ban for a first doping offense, whereas in WADA it's 4 years, sometimes 2. So you're much less likely to be tested. You're much less likely to be sanctioned when you are tested positive, and your sanctions are shorter. So overall, and this is the interesting one, NCAA is far more lenient on doping than I think USADA and WADA would be. But on that one category, which includes caffeine, they are more strict. If you get caught.
Yeah.
If you get caught.
It seems a little bit odd to me. It seems a little bit nanny state as well, which surprises me, especially in America, that they're so concerned about college athletes and caffeine.
Yeah, I mean, just on that,
There's
so it's not the presence of caffeine that's banned. It's the presence of caffeine above a certain concentration. I think 15 milligrams or something, which works out.
Milligrams.
Yeah, and so in a typical person, you've got to have a pretty massive dose of coffee to get that much caffeine in. So the NCAA will argue that they're not banning drinking coffee. Go to Starbucks and have 2, but don't have 8. And certainly don't take caffeine pills in large doses, because then we believe you are trying to enhance performance, and you are actually with stimulants. There's some risk to stimulants. I mean, there have been deaths in endurance sports, marathons, for instance. There was a famous case in the London Marathon of a woman, I think her name was Claire Squires, who had a cardiac arrest that was in autopsy suggested to be the result of a weight loss supplement that contained stimulants that she was taking.
Well, so when I'm joking about a nanny state, perhaps I'm
Yeah, and I mean,
in effect, that it can have serious implications.
I've seen some data on supplements, and we've spoken often about the risks of supplements, but by far the biggest contributor to hospital admissions among supplements is the stimulant category. And that includes other things more than just caffeine, which is a mild stimulant, but it's on that list. And it's interesting, and just the last word on caffeine is, remember, until about 2004, WADA also had caffeine on the banned list. But I think they recognized that it was so universally consumed that they were inviting more problems than they were going to address, like real problems. And so they made the call to take it off. And that's one of those dilemmas where it's not that dissimilar to what we were talking about earlier about medical use, except caffeine's not medical, although some people might think of it as that. So they kind of like, I don't want to say it's an admission of defeat, but it's just a recognition that this wasn't a battle worth fighting. But I think in younger people, given the risks of complications with stimulant abuse, not necessarily use, but abuse, you can see why they do that.
Any idea if you need an underlying pathology to be susceptible to stimulant abuse?
To abuse or to the side effects of it?
Either or.
Probably both, actually. Yeah, it's not because I mean, some people.
I'm just thinking of that marathon runner.
Yeah, so that's something in her that would have had to react to the presence of high levels of stimulant and so on. So you have to have something there, but I don't know what it is. With cardiac arrest, there has to be some predisposition, and then you look for a trigger event, whether that's a viral infection or some structural abnormality in the heart. I don't know. I don't remember whether that autopsy specifically said anything about that. I don't think that they did. I feel like I would have remembered that. So I suspect it's just a reaction to it, and I don't know whether there's a susceptibility in a small segment of people.
I was just thinking about the Red Bull sponsorship of endurance events these days.
Yeah, well, how many Red Bulls?
That was sensible.
Well, how many Red Bulls it takes to get to 15 milligrams in the urine?
I don't know. It says it's 15 milligrams is about 6 to 8 cups of coffee. So we're not. Other energy drinks are available, obviously. But anyway, I've always wanted to say that on the podcast. So we'll move on to centre stage, and we'll look at the Women's Rugby World Cup. The first round of matches were completed last weekend, and the organisers they've got to be ecstatic actually at the turnout of fans and the atmosphere at the matches. The tournament's managing director, Sarah Massey, and she said what's really consistent across all the matches we've seen so far is the electric atmosphere, the joy and the vibrancy of the fans, and that sense and feeling that they're part of something that's really special. And me personally, I've got to agree, because I'm going to throw a few stats at you as well. England's home opener in Sunderland drew a World Cup record crowd of over 42,000. 400,000 tickets have been sold for the tournament as a whole, and the final is already an 82,000 ticket sellout. And the TV coverage, I think, has been excellent, and the and figures are great. And so all is rosy in the Women's World Cup unless you happen to be one of the minnows in the pool. The points differentials have been almost as opening as the ticket sales, but I think that's probably just something to be expected at this stage in the evolution of the women's game. But you've noticed it as well.
Yeah, and I think there was some debate about this. We're not initiating this debate on our own. There was some discussion. Where was it? In the Guardian. In fact, yes, the link will be in the show notes. Mismatches will not halt the momentum. I think that's true for this World Cup, but I do think that if we look a little bit further over the horizon or beyond the horizon, one of the biggest threats to the continued growth of the women's game is the inequality in it. And I think, it's not unique to women's rugby. Like I went back and I looked in the last men's World Cup in 2023. There were 17 matches out of 48 that had a victory margin of 30 points or more. So that's more than every third game is what I would consider a blowout. At that men's World Cup, it was 10 matches out of 48 were won by 50 points or more. So that's every fifth match is a massive blowout. So we'll keep an eye on what's happening in the Women's World Cup, because they're right that as it gets later in the tournament, the standard and the gap between teams should get smaller. But I suspect that the mismatches are more frequent and larger in women than they were in men in 2023. But as you note, that's because of where women's rugby is in its growth phase. And there are teams that are in the first generation of professional women's rugby. There are teams that are not even in the first generation. Teams like Brazil, Samoa, Fiji. South Africa has just, I think, turned the corner. But 2 years ago, we didn't have professional women's rugby players in South Africa. So they're going to go up against women who are playing in France, Canada, and especially England, where they're in the fourth or fifth generation of a well-structured, systematic pathway that takes 15-year-olds and turns them into good 25-year-olds. And so in the future, if the investment isn't matched in the developing countries, women's rugby will become even more lopsided than men's, where there really will be 3 or 4 teams that are absolutely dominant and no other teams get a look in. And so I think that would, if I was directing and steering World Rugby's women's high performance strategy, I'd be that would be top of my priority list, is how do I get the 4th to 9th, 10th team to accelerate their performance progressions.
I agree. I don't think it's really fair to go back and look at the last men's World Cup, because men's game is already more established. And if you go back, I had a look at some of the scores, like Australia-Namibia in 2003, 142-0. In 1995, New Zealand beat Japan 145-17. And as late as 1999, England beat Tonga 101-10. So all we're seeing is a mirror of what happened 20, 30 years ago in the men's team,
exactly.
In the men's tournaments, I feel. And that's just backing up your point. And I think the women's game at the moment, say you've got the groups of, I think, 4, is it? And there's only one powerful team in each of those groups. So you're going to see these mismatches. It just happens to be in the first week of the tournament. We saw a lot of them. But now if you look at the men's game, it's far more competitive. And I know you might have a group of 4, but there's now 2 powerful teams in it. And this is a very slow incremental thing. And I don't think that gap is going to grow quite as much as you believe it's going to be, where the top 4 teams accelerate away, because their ability to improve is diminishing. They're still improving, but at a diminishing rate. Whereas the teams below are going to be coming up a lot faster, and they'll be closing that gap.
Yeah, that's certainly the hypothesis that I hope is correct. The alternative one, I'll throw this out there, is one of the things that has accelerated, for instance, the England progression, France I think is the same, maybe Canada, is that there's a lot of institutional wisdom that's coming across from the men's game into the women's game with respects to strength and conditioning, tactical and technical development. And then also there are socio-cultural factors that have allowed those countries to put rugby into schools so the girls can play them. In South Africa, for instance, schools don't have girls' rugby. So we need to think creatively about how we find 19, 20-year-olds who will become our best 27-year-olds in the future. And you always work talent ID backwards, right? The simple question is, in 2033, at the World Cup that's played wherever that World Cup goes, we want to have a team of 23, 25-year-olds. That's 8 years from now. So by definition, they're 17 years old today. Where are they? Now, in South Africa, the answer is they're not playing rugby, so we've got to still find them. Whereas in England, they're playing the sport. So they've got a head start because of socio-economic, cultural factors around sport, but also so much institutional wisdom has come across that accelerates the development of young players into adults. And so I think the gap gets bigger initially before it gets closed. That's the risk, I think. But eventually, you're right.
You need to be looking earlier.
You need to look earlier.
You need to be looking earlier than 17.
Yeah, for sure. But then
rules.
You're right. So let's ask the question of 2041's World Cup. In 2041, a Rugby World Cup will be played somewhere in the world, we hope. Those people who represent South Africa, England, Wales, and that World Cup will be 25 to 30 years old at that stage. Now, that's 16 years. That means that they're 9 years old today. What are they doing? They probably shouldn't be playing rugby at 9. Maybe they can. No, it's not that they shouldn't be. They don't necessarily need to be playing rugby, but there needs to be some athletic foundation that's built in those young kids from the age of 9. Then when they're 12, what do they do? When they're 15, what will they be doing? When they leave school, where will they go? Those are questions that England can answer in 2025 of what happened in 2010. South Africa's got no hope. Fiji, Samoa, Brazil, Spain, they are 5 generations behind, and that's the gap that has to be closed, and that takes a long, long time. And if it's not supported by, I think, quite strong investment, I don't know if it will be.
It's getting there in the men's game, as we say. It's not entirely there. If you were running women's rugby in one of these countries, say South Africa, and you had a certain amount of money to focus, where would you put it? Would you put it in at the top level or much further down?
Medium down. I think what you do is because in rugby, because the game is so heavily influenced by physical development, I don't think that you put the money in anyone before adolescence. I think it's inefficient spending. So I would go to 16, 17-year-olds. So that means that you've got to target high schools in South Africa. In other countries, it might be clubs. But our sports system is built on schools. So I'd be looking at schools here, maybe Fiji schools, maybe England, Canada, and the United States would have to be clubs. I'm not sure what their systems are like. But that's where you go. And I think what you do is you say you've never played rugby before, but you've shown athletic ability. You're a runner, you've played netball, hockey, other sports. Maybe you play soccer, football. Let's see if we can introduce you to rugby at the age of 16, 17 and convert some of that athleticism into rugby performance talent. That's how I would go about it.
But at the same time, you've got to hope then that you can keep that momentum going, because at the same time, your international team then is going to be struggling at the very top. It's just, do you personally see there's a lot of hope for women's rugby in that sense? It's just going to take a long time.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of hope. It's just a cautionary word that you can't say, hey, look, the game's in great health because it's commercially successful and it's growing and things are picking up, we're breaking records and things are looking good. Because if you don't really support, I think there's a risk that the rich get richer and the poor just stay where they are. So if it's come across as a negative prophecy of doom, then that's not what I intended it to be. It's more just to say that there really needs to be targeted investment into the development of these other countries, because the gaps that we see now, they'll take a long, long, long time to come down if we don't get that.
Mm-hmm. I think rugby's peculiar in that way because it's quite a very technical sport, and obviously I've noticed some of the skill levels. I messaged you and said some of the skill levels I was a little bit disappointed at in the first round of games, and then I actually thought about it, and it's not that the skill levels are poor, it's that the skill levels on the other team, the winning team in this case, usually on the end of a route, are very high, and so you see this massive disparity, and so you're seeing players not having any time on the ball in the weaker teams, and so they're making handling errors. They look physically a lot slower and less athletic than their opponents, and that gap is so apparent that it makes it look like the game itself isn't as high quality, whereas it is. You just don't have the same matchups, and that's what's causing the problems, I think, because some of the handling behind the ball has been absolutely superb.
Yeah, and like when England play Canada and France, when you get the top 4 or 5 teams playing in among one another, so semi-finals, I think you'll see quite good on both sides, when both sides have the ball and when both sides are defending. But just on the physical development and so on, we did an analysis in 2019. It's actually due for revision because it only went up to the 2017 World Cup, looking at the height and the weight of the players at every World Cup since the records existed. So for men, it goes back to 1987. For women, it goes back to early 2000s. And the gap between the so-called Tier 1 countries and the Tier 2 countries is proportionally bigger in women than it is in men. And it hadn't closed over the course of the 15 years of analysis in women, whereas it had narrowed in men. And so that's an example of where you just have these enormous disparities. And conditioning and the ability... So 2 things. The ability to identify the right crop of players who can be trained and developed into world-class rugby players is the first differentiator. And secondly is that the environment that develops them. And now we're only talking physical development. So are they able to get into gyms and weight rooms and lift? And is the training appropriate for the preparation for the match demands? That was definitely lagging. And so that's an example. That's probably one of the easier wins, actually, in the women's game. But then the same arguments will be possible around technical skill development. And there's no doubt that there's this first mover advantage that England, New Zealand, France, Canada, United States have. That is, and it's not just first mover; it's first, second, third, fourth mover, and everyone else is only now moving to catch up. So yeah, these disparities exist, and hopefully they come down. But it's going to take real concerted effort. Like in South, I can't speak to the rest of the world, but in South Africa, SA Rugby brought on Lynn Cantwell was her name, like really impressive, great track record and high performance, and she's within a couple of years put so many things in place that have allowed our women to go to the World Cup with realistic chances of making at least the quarterfinal. And we look like an accomplished, well-prepared side now. So you can make fast gains if you make investments because there's so much institutional wisdom in rugby as a whole. You can learn from it and accelerate performances better, but you have to be deliberate about it. Otherwise, it doesn't happen.
Because I suppose it's more efficient to follow other people's leads. Let England and that work out how to do it and then follow what they're doing. Something else that came up on Discourse, though, Jenkin RS, who added some excellent value to comments, because I know he's a big Canada supporter and he knows quite a lot about it. His daughter, I think, is in the pathway. And he said that Canada have put a lot of money into developing the sides and time. But he's also said about how much better the attacking would be if the women plays with a size 4 to 4.5 ball. And I know that's something that you've been championing in yourself, and it's come up again. So it's one of those things where I think let the players decide. I don't think that should be forced on them.
Yeah, I wish it were. Every time I watch a game, I was like, this would be so much. It would be even better because the thing is the speed of the pass, the accuracy of the pass, and also the ability to offload with one hand would all be improved. And you'd see more line breaks, more space, faster game, fewer handling errors. I think and it's going to happen. I'm pretty confident it's going to happen because every time we've introduced that smaller ball to a group of players, whether it's the under-26 nations, there was an under-18, there was a Celtic Challenge women's tournament, it's now being used a little bit by some sevens teams around the world. Every time, the positive feedback outnumbers negative 5-1, 4-1. So 80% of players are saying, this is way better, we like this. So I'm sure it's going to happen, and when it does, I hope the difference is visible. I'm sure it will be.
It's better for handling, isn't it? More difficult to kick a smaller ball, though.
That's the only area where you're right. It's the only area where the feedback hasn't been as good. It's mixed. I'd say it's probably split 50-50. And one of the challenges we had, this is sort of an aside, is that we got the smaller ball made. But when you make a smaller ball, it's quite difficult, they tell me, to change the proportion of the ball without changing the sweet spot of the ball. Because it's not just a simple matter of like, let's reduce the circumference by 10% or whatever that difference was. And so we went back to them with some of the feedback from the players, and they've now developed a same-sized smaller ball, but with a different sweet spot that they believe is the same. So they'll say it's not going to be too difficult. But you're right, kicking a football compared to a tennis ball is a big difference. But I don't think the 10% will make a difference. And it'll be a little bit lighter. and I think it'll travel a little bit better. So I think the kicking will improve with a smaller ball, but only if they get the design and nuance exactly right. Kicking is I think the area in the women's game where the biggest difference exists. Look at the successful conversions and penalty kicks at goal stats in men versus women, and you'll see that it is a big difference between the games. So if we can solve that problem, it'll be even better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll go into Ross Replies here, but we'll stay on the Women's World Cup because we had a question about the nature of the head impacts from Dr. Stu over on Discourse. He says, am I wrong in perceiving a higher proportion of head impacts seem to be another word I can't say. Occipital?
Occipital.
Occipital.
That's back of the head.
Wax. Back of the head, occurring when the player hits the ground back first.
Yeah.
Is this a more common injury pattern in the women's game, and if so, why? And this is a lesson why I need to read these out loud first.
Have you seen, good question, thanks Stu. Have you seen in American football, they reckon the quarterback is highly likely to hit their head on the turf as they get tackled backwards as they're making a throw. That's basically the scenario that Stu is talking about here. Now in American football that happens because the quarterback's performing a task of throwing the ball. So let's say he's right-handed. His right hand is engaged and his left hand is active and he gets tackled. He's got nothing to brace his contact backwards. So he gets tackled backwards and his head bounces off the ground. So what Stuart's observed is actually something there is a good discussion about, and I think it's quite an interesting one. About 6 or 7 years ago now, just prior to COVID, a researcher in Wales, Liz Williams, did an analysis of university players to try and identify how concussions happened. This is known in men because there's so much video footage of men's rugby that it's not difficult to do. But in women, it's more difficult because there's just not as much head injury data with video. So she was able to do that at university level, and she described that 20-something%, I think it was, of women's concussions were results of head ground impacts. Not necessarily back of the head, but head ground. So in 2023, we said we need to know this for the elite game because all the strategies that have been developed around trying to protect players against concussion come from men's data, and we need to fix that. So let's look at women's data. And so we published a study, and those of you watching it on YouTube will be able to see this as I go through it, but I'm going to read it to you so you won't miss out if you're listening. It was published earlier this year eventually. It took a while. And it's called Higher Contact Tackles from Upright Tacklers Increases the Risk of Head Injury Removals in Elite Women's Rugby Union, a case control study. And what we basically did in this study was we had 145 videos of head injury removals, and we analyzed exactly the circumstances in which they happened. I want to jump ahead to the discussion of that paper to try and address Stuart's question specifically. The main thing we found was that body contact was far, far, far more likely to cause a head injury than a ground contact. So to Stuart's question, it depends. So I'll read to you from the discussion, section 4.2. Previous research introduced a theory that women suffer head injuries via a different mechanism to men, with ground contact causing many more concussions in women, 27%, than in men, 10%. That's the study in university players that I've just mentioned to you. Our findings in the elite game contradict this, and head injury removals due to ground impact are in fact uncommon, accounting for only 6 out of 110 tackle removals in women. So that's 5.5%. So 1 in 16, 17 tackles, head injuries is a ground contact. However, there's nuance to this, right? Because in men, that figure is 1%. So women are more likely to have head injuries as a result of ground contact than men, but the numbers we're talking are very small relative to body contact. Does that distinction make sense? Now, that's not to say that the work that Liz Williams did in the university level players in Wales was wrong, where they found it was like 25, 26%. And we go on in our discussion, say it may be that higher level of player in our cohort, because we looked at elite players, with the resultant technical competency, including the ability to go to ground safely, is an important factor compared to university players described previously. Furthermore, elite players may have greater neck strength, as well as proprioceptive ability to stabilize the head in response to direct and indirect forces. So that was the finding in that particular study. Now, the reason this is interesting and noteworthy is you've got two things here. Overall, in general, men and women have the same mechanism of injury. But there are some small differences where women are more likely to hit their head on the ground and then be injured, but the numbers in absolute terms are lower. But the theory that's emerging is that when you are not technically proficient, you're still learning how to tackle, and you may have weaknesses in the neck. When you fall, your falling competency is not what it needs to be. And so we've been playing around with this idea that, and this is, sorry, take a step back. One of the big challenges or characteristics of women's rugby that makes it a challenge is that unlike boys who start playing at 8, 9, 10 and may learn how to fall and how to tackle and be tackled, a lot of girls and women are coming to the sport so much later. We've just discussed that. Like, oftentimes, you're only getting these players in at the age of 17, 18. And then as adults, they are finding themselves tackling other adults in rugby matches. They haven't necessarily learned the foundational skills to fall and tackle and be tackled. And so that's a specific focus with respects to women's rugby now, is developing tackle competency and confidence so that they fall and tackle better.
Can I just ask you a question then? We've just been talking about massive inequalities in the difference in physical and skill levels in the women's game at the Rugby World Cup. Does that mean that the players on the weaker sides are in far more danger of these incidents?
That's a real concern, yes. And whether there's enough data to look at it, when those WXV tournaments were played, we try to look at whether mismatches in performance ability, and at the previous World Cup, which was played in New Zealand, whether a Tier 1 side playing against a Tier 2 side, or even a Tier 3, if you want to call them that, was more likely to cause injuries. And I think it probably is, but it doesn't happen often enough to be statistically discoverable. But it's a concern for sure.
Well, I was going to say about statistically discoverable, because isn't this quite a weak study? Because I noticed that there's only 110 tackle-related events. There are only 2 tacklers and 4 ball carriers.
Well, relative to a study with 1,000, it's weak, yes. I know. I mean, for sure, we would love to get 300 tackles. And in 2029, I will hopefully revisit this and do that update. But the problem is, like in this study, like, we've spoken about sample size. That 110 is every study we have in the women's game with video and a head injury outcome.
But moving forward, the mouth guards are going to give you this data and a lot more of it.
Well, you'll get different data, and that's one of the reasons we were so excited about the mouth guards, is because in this study, we identify a case, as in one of those 110 tackle instances, as a player who comes off the field because of a head injury assessment removal. What the mouth guard is doing is it's allowing every tackle to be counted, whereas in this one you've got to wait for the clinical outcome before you can include it. So the data set expands 150-fold as a consequence of having mouth guard data. Whether that mouth guard data means the same thing as a clinical removal, they're clearly not. It's a spectrum of head impacts and their outcomes. But you're right. I mean, like I was looking the other day, actually, one of the projects now is looking at women's head accelerations. And in the Premiership Women's Competition last year, we've got 40,000 head acceleration events in one season. This study had 110 head injuries over 6 years, I think it was, that the data was collected. So the data set's expanding. Yeah, it's astonishing.
So to go back to answer Dr. Stu then, in simple terms, I know you said it depends. It's not more common.
It's more
head impact.
It's more common, but you're talking about more common at a scale difference of 1% versus 5 to 6%. So it's a rare event in men, and it's a slightly less rare event in women, is the way I would summarize it.
Okay then.
Elite women. Sorry, so that's important to clarify. Elite women.
Yeah, elite women.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll just wrap up with a quick and finally, and it's a similar sort of topic actually, because Mike asked a question on Discourse about youth rugby again in Norway of all places. So he asks, how should youth players be introduced to tackling? Perhaps then, obviously, this is just exactly what we've been talking about. It says perhaps touch rugby until a certain age, then a contact training phase, and then full contact later on. He makes a good point that in a country like Norway, which doesn't have a rugby grounding, it's much harder for parents to make informed decisions about their kids' participation. And I know that you have some thoughts on this, having watched kids play yourself. So
Yeah, so
taken away there.
one of my best friend's sons is playing under 9 rugby now in his local school competition, and they play 10-a-side. They don't do any set pieces, but it's still full tackle, which is relevant to the question. And I've watched a couple of his games now, and I make a lot of observations, some of them to do with talent development and pathways and so on. We can park those for maybe another time. But if we stay on the safety issue, I then go from my friend's son's game to another friend's who's playing in the age group 1 year older. They play full field, full set pieces. Everything is full on, full contact. And there are players leaving the field with injuries all the time. And so I do worry a little bit about the fact that these kids are playing full contact rugby at that age, and they haven't necessarily learned the technical competency, because we've got some interesting data once again from the mouthguards, where in the very first studies that this happened with, we put them in community level players in New Zealand at the ages of 13, 15, 19 and adults. And then what you do is you compare in a typical hour of training and in a typical hour of playing in a match how many injuries they have. This is that study. It's called Head Acceleration Events in Male Community Rugby Players, right? So you can, I'll put the link to this in the show notes and you can have a look at it. From that study, I think it's figure 4, basically shows the following. So it plots, you'll have a look at this, a panel of 4 graphs. It plots the number of head acceleration events per hour in forwards and backs during matches and training, in adults, in 19-year-olds, in 15-year-olds, and in 13-year-olds. And a couple of points. The hourly number of head acceleration events in 13-year-olds is so much lower than in adults. It's like literally a quarter to a half the number. So children don't experience head impacts anything like adults do. But one of the really interesting findings here is that when children train, the head impact rate is the same as when they play matches. In adults, as you get older, training has a much lower head acceleration rate than in adults. So if you look at the graph in that paper, you'll see the dark blue and the purple lines are the match numbers, and the pink and the yellow lines are the training numbers. And you can see bottom right that the training numbers are the same as the match numbers in children, whereas in adults considerably lower. So why does that potentially matter? I think what it tells you is that when you are learning to tackle, as in training, as a young child, the risk of head accelerations and head impacts is quite high because you don't have technical competency yet. Whereas when you've achieved that competency and then you play matches, it's much higher because the intensity of the match and the relative speed and the quality of that match is so much higher. Does that logic make sense to you?
It does, yeah.
So the practical implication of that, I think, is that you have to be very careful and very deliberate and very proficient in how you teach children to tackle from very young ages. Because I think what you want is by the time they get to 11, 12, 13, and they're bigger, they're faster, and they're stronger, and then think even more so when they get to the ages of 16, 17 after adolescence. Now you've got really high speeds and forces and kinetic energy. I think that the requirement to deliver technical competency in children aged between 8 and 12 is so high. It's so important. And that's why when people say that children shouldn't tackle and shouldn't learn to tackle until they are older, there's a risk there, because if you don't teach them to tackle till they're older, you're going to put them in matches when the forces and the impact and the speed are so much higher, and now they don't have the competency to tolerate and deal with that. So the conclusion I'm getting to, hopefully I haven't lost you in this, is I think you have to learn to tackle quite young, but you have to avoid exposure to risky tackles until you are competent. So the process by which you learn to tackle is so crucial for young players to learn.
So don't delay it, is the answer to that one.
Don't delay training, but delay exposure to risky tackle exposures in matches is what I would do. Train it young, but expose it in matches later, by the age of 11, 12. But you and the key thing in all of this is that you shouldn't teach children just how to hit. You've got to teach them how to tackle well. It's a skill that I don't think many coaches, well, no, that's not true. Most rugby unions around the world now really do recognize and prioritize the teaching of these things as skills. But when I watch with my friends and I watch the parents, I don't know that they necessarily understand that. And they just want big hits. And that's not what we should be teaching kids to do. Teach them to tackle well so that when they do need to make big hits, they've got the technical foundations to do it safely.
See, we were always taught this, they can't go anywhere without their legs. This big hit. Kids being trained to do big hits is quite concerning to me, in effect.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's why it's starting. I go from watching my friends 8-9-year-old to watching the 10-11-year-olds, and it's like I'm transitioning into professional rugby. If they accelerate, the point I'm trying to make is I think they accelerate the process too fast, because the little kids playing at 8 or 9, the hits are soft and the game is slower, and it looks like a good learning experience. By the time they're 10, I feel like I'm watching competitive rugby. They turn a corner too quickly, in my opinion.
I'm wondering if it's a cultural thing. I wonder if it's a South African thing.
I don't know.
And perhaps that's why you're so good when he gets to international level, because it all filters upwards.
Could be
interesting to know.
Could be, yeah.
Thanks for the question anyway, Mike.
Yeah,
good luck.
Yeah, hopefully that gives you a practical message, is don't delay exposure to the tackle, but just make sure you teach it really well. And then what you do want to delay is the high-risk application of the tackle, I think. Yeah.
Are they, at that young age, are they doing full-on scrummaging?
They start from the age of 10. And here's a story for you. Okay, so this was mad to me. Like, I watched my friend Richard's son Axe play. We finish the game. They don't do any set pieces. It's basically like a static. They just stand opposing one another. The ball pops out. They play. The 10-year-olds are playing full scrum. Get to the field, and one of the kids is lying down, and he's had a neck injury in a scrum. They have to drive an ambulance onto the field, and they take him off. Hopefully, I think he was okay afterwards, but it's just one of those precautionary things. It's the way the spectators told that the scrum collapsed, and he said, my neck, and the referee, good for him, he blew the whistle, he stopped it. They got medical care to the guy. But then they decided that for the rest of the game, and there was about 25 minutes or something to go, they were going to play it with an uncontested scrum. And one of the team's parents, one of the parents of one of the on the side of one of the teams, was really upset by this, because, and I quote, "We've got a really strong set piece, and now we can't use it to take advantage and win this match." I was like, I stood there, I was listening to these guys talking on the side. I was like, "Are you shitting me? You're talking about an uncontested scrum in a 10-year-old. You've just seen a guy get a bad injury, and that's the thing you want to worry about, is that your team can't exploit its strong set piece. They're 10, pal.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, and that's the root to the problem with some parents.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah.
I mean, I've played prop, and I know the forces that go through that scrum. And, even when you're an adult, they can be really scary.
Yeah.
So for a kid who's like not fully developed yet, I mean, their bones aren't fully developed, right? Yeah, it's like, anyway.
Yeah.
We're going off topic a little there.
Listen,
so there we go.
We didn't even talk about cycling. Have you been watching the Vuelta? Last thing.
Bits and pieces. I haven't really been following it, which is a shame, because I know it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's shaping up quite
anyway,
good.
more competitive.
It's look, there's a long way to go, right? We're not even really at the first weekend. And there's 10 summit finishes. I think we've had 2. The third one is today.
Yeah.
So it could really blow out. But so far it looks pretty competitive. Yesterday there were some attacks. They were all marked by 5 or 6 guys. It looks like it'll be a more competitive race, and possibly, well, for now, these are potentially famous last words, deeper than even the Giro was. So yeah, it'll be a good one to keep an eye on. The other thing I watched yesterday, which was tremendously entertaining, was the Tour l'Avenir, which is the youth tour. They compete in national teams. So Paul Seixas was competing for France, and Jarno Vidar is competing for Belgium. He won it, incidentally, Vidar. But it was really good. There were 5 guys with 4Ks to go, and they were effectively taking turns throwing attacks. It was unlike what you see in overly controlled, micromanaged adults. Well, they are adults, but you know what I mean, cycling. So it was pretty entertaining. There's an interesting stage today in the Tour l'Avenir. They do 2 stages on one day. The morning is a 40K mountain stage, and then in the afternoon they do a mountain uphill time trial. It's a pretty novel approach to stage racing. So give that a watch if you can.
I will indeed.
That's about it, actually, I think. Yeah, unless you got anything else to add.
No, I'm all good.
All good. Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone. We've spoken a lot about track and field because we're building up nicely to Tokyo. We've got, I think, a cracking podcast for you next week, a feature pod that'll come out early in the week, so you can look forward to that. As always, feedback, comments, your own thoughts on the topics we've discussed are more than welcome over on Discourse. You know what to do, links in the show notes. Speaking of cycling, I'm going to play you out with a clip of Gareth's 6-week cycling block yesterday in the Welsh summer. We will the sound does this enough, so you can listen to it, or you can go on YouTube where this video will also be available. Give it a watch.
It'll be easier on your body,
Until next time, goodbye.
There's something wonderful about the British weather in summer. So when you go out for a nice bike ride, it turns into this. Stop trail running, he said. Take up riding, they said. It'll be easier on your body, they said. Sod it.